Have you ever stared at a blank screen? Or maybe a totally daunting study guide, or even just a completely cluttered room, and you felt entirely, hopelessly paralyzed?
Oh, absolutely. It's the worst feeling.
Right. Like you know exactly what you want to achieve. You want the finished paper, or the clean room, or the passing grade.
Yeah.
But the sheer weight of taking that very first step just feels, I don't know, like pushing a boulder uphill. It feels impossible.
It really does. And I think the tragedy is that we often treat this paralysis as a character flaw.
Oh, for sure. We label ourselves lazy or undisciplined or disorganized.
Exactly. But what if that inability to start isn't a moral failure at all? What if, it's actually a highly predictable systemic glitch in the human brain?
That is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are exploring the actual mechanics of starting.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're going to look at the science of habit formation and the philosophy of continuous improvement. We're basically dismantling the whole myth of the overnight success
And replacing it with highly effective, systematic approaches to just getting things done.
Right. And to do this, we are pulling from a really diverse stack of sources today. We've got cognitive behavioral therapy techniques from CBT Los Angeles.
We're looking at insights on beating the fear of the blank canvas from Artist Strong.
Yep. And productivity frameworks from Bodo in College and CapTech. Plus the psychological mechanics from James Clear's Atomic Habits.
And we're even scaling that up to the Japanese industrial philosophy of Kaizen.
Which is wild to think about. And we'll tie it all together with practical applications like British Council IELTS prep and Sylvia Pizarro-McCann's graphic design color theory.
It sounds like a lot, but the through line is incredibly consistent.
It is. Because our mission for you today is to shortcut your path to becoming an unstoppable learner and doer. We're going to show you how to shrink overwhelming projects into microscopic, inevitable victories.
So before we can talk about building lifelong habits or optimizing your workflow, we have to address the elephant in the room.
The terrifying first step.
Exactly, the initial friction. Our source from Artist Strong refers to this specifically as the fear of the blank canvas.
Yeah, and they point out that a pure, untouched surface, whether it's an actual canvas or a blank Word document, is intimidating because it demands perfection.
Right. It confronts us with our own self-doubt. The blank space is essentially looking at you and asking, are you actually skilled enough to ruin this perfect white void?
Which is such a heavy burden to place on yourself before you've even picked up a brush or a pen.
It's massive. And if we connect this artistic fear to the clinical perspective from CBT Los Angeles, we get a much clearer picture of what's mechanically happening in the brain.
Okay, so break that down for us. What is the clinical cycle here?
Well, according to CBT principles, procrastination isn't really a time management problem. It's an emotion regulation problem.
Oh, wow. That changes how you look at it completely.
Right. When the task ahead feels unpleasant or overwhelming, your brain's amygdala literally perceives it as a mild threat.
Like a physical danger.
Essentially, yes, it triggers anxiety. And to avoid that emotional discomfort, we delay the task.
So I decide to go organize my spice rack instead of writing my thesis.
Exactly. And here's the evolutionary trap. The moment you decide to avoid the task, your brain rewards you. You get this immediate, palpable rush of relief.
Your brain says, hey, threat avoided. Good job.
Yes. So the avoidance behavior is chemically reinforced in real time.
But that short-term relief is basically a high-interest loan, right?
Yeah.
The bill eventually comes due.
It's a brutal long-term cost. The longer you avoid the task, the more the background anxiety compounds. The brain knows the threat is still out there.
Looming over you.
Yep. And this mounting anxiety makes the task seem even more aversive than it was in the first place, which fuels a secondary wave of avoidance.
So it's a self-reinforcing negative feedback loop. The work piles up, your motivation plummets, and then all the shame and guilt latch on.
Making the psychological barrier to entry incredibly high.
Okay, so how do we short-circuit this glitch? Artist Strong suggests that the antidote is to actively lower the stakes.
Right, you have to give yourself explicit permission to make bad art or do a terrible job on the first draft.
But CBT Los Angeles gives us a very rigid structural tool to force this low-stakes environment, don't they?
Yes, they introduced the 5-minute rule. And the methodology is brilliant because it's so simple.
You just commit to doing the dreaded task for exactly 5 minutes. That's it.
That is the entire commitment. You make a firm contract with yourself. If, after 5 minutes, the task is completely unbearable, you have full permission to walk away. Zero guilt.
You aren't committing to cleaning the whole house or finishing the chapter. just 300 seconds of existing in the space of the work.
Right. It's an exercise in lowering the psychological friction.
It's like negotiating with a stubborn toddler, the toddler being your own amygdala.
That is a perfect analogy.
It's like telling yourself you're only going to dip a toe in a freezing pool, rather than committing to swimming a mile.
Yeah.
Anyone can tolerate dipping a toe. But I have to ask, why does the human brain manufacture so much anxiety about starting tasks that we logically want or need to do? And why does this 5-minute trick actually work?
Well, the brain is an energy conservation machine. When it looks at a massive project, it tries to calculate the total caloric and cognitive energy required to reach the finish line.
And it sees a massive energy expenditure, so it hits the brake.
Exactly. But by implementing the 5-minute rule, you restrict the brain's forecasting, you shrink the perceived energy requirement down to almost nothing.
You're bypassing the resistance.
Yes, because the hardest part of any task is simply overcoming resting inertia. Once you start, momentum builds.
The brain transitions from avoidance, the amygdala, to active engagement in the prefrontal cortex.
Right. The vast majority of the time, once you cross that 5-minute threshold, it's actually significantly easier to just maintain the momentum and keep working.
The initial hurdle was just a mirage. But those first 5 minutes have to be incredibly fragile, right? If your brain is actively looking for an excuse to bail, any minor distraction is going to look like a lifeline.
Extremely fragile. That is why CBT Los Angeles is adamant about removing distractions during those 300 seconds. You can't just rely on willpower.
So putting the phone face down on the desk isn't enough.
No, put it out of sight. Put it in another room. They advise using browser plugins to block social media or wearing noise-canceling headphones.
Because if your phone vibrates at minute 3, your brain will seize that as a legitimate excuse to abort the mission.
Exactly. And they also bring up task switching avoidance. If you suddenly remember an urgent email you need to send during those 5 minutes, the instinct is to switch tasks.
But you can't stop.
You must not stop. You write a brief note on a physical piece of paper to remember the email, and you immediately return to the primary task. Protect that initial momentum loop at all costs.
Okay, so that handles the blank canvas. You've survived the first 5 minutes. The inertia is broken.
But what if the project itself is monstrously large?
Right. Like writing a thesis or learning a new language. 5 minutes is great for starting, but the sheer scale of the undertaking still feels like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon.
In that case, you have to shrink the project itself, deconstruct the mammoth.
And Bowdoin College provides a really concrete 4-step framework for exactly this. Step 1 is defining milestones based on phases.
You take the monolith and fracture it into chronological phases, monthly, weekly, or daily sub-projects.
And then step 2 is defining the specific tasks required to hit those milestones. But there's a critical psychological detail here. You have to brainstorm and write down every single step using highly specific active verbs.
This is rooted deeply in cognitive load theory. If you look at a typical to-do list, it usually has vague directives like work on paper or research topic.
Which aren't actionable items at all. They're conceptual categories.
Exactly. When your brain encounters a vague directive, it has to expend executive functioning energy just to interpret what that means in the moment. Creates an immediate decision point.
And every decision point is an opportunity to procrastinate. If I have to figure out what work on paper actually means, I'm already exhausted before I type a word.
Ambiguity breeds hesitation. But if your task list says write 300 words or read chapter 3, there is zero ambiguity. The physical action is predefined.
Work on paper is a suggestion. State argument A is a command. I love that.
It removes the cognitive friction of translation.
So step 3 is putting those hyperspecific tasks in a logical order. And step 4 is adding them to a calendar, working backward from the due date, using 25 to 90-minute work sessions.
Right. And this connects perfectly with the concept of micro-habits from Debunk. They suggest that sustainable success isn't about dramatic, Herculean efforts.
It's about tiny, almost imperceptible daily actions. Actions so small they require zero motivation.
Like reading 1 page or doing 5 push-ups.
Gepidek rounds this in BJ Fogg's behavior model, which says that behavior equals motivation plus ability plus a trigger.
Most people rely entirely on the motivation variable. But motivation is notoriously unreliable. It fluctuates wildly based on your blood sugar, your sleep, your stress.
If your system requires high motivation to function, you're going to fail eventually.
Mathematical certainty. So the goal is to shift the weight of the equation off of motivation and entirely onto ability. Tiny habits succeed because they maximize ability.
If my goal is to read a single page, my ability to execute that is near 100%, even if I'm tired.
The behavior becomes inevitable, which echoes James Clear's 2-minute rule from his book Atomic Habits. A new habit should take less than 2 minutes to do.
It's the 5-minute rule applied to daily routines.
And Clear frames this through the law of least effort. Humans naturally gravitate to the path of least resistance.
We're wired to conserve energy.
You can't fight millions of years of evolutionary programming with just sheer willpower. You have to engineer your environment so that doing the right thing is the absolute path of least resistance.
Okay, I do want to push back on one thing from the Bowdoin College framework, though.
Sure, what's that?
In step 4, they explicitly advise students to overestimate how long each task will take to build in buffer time. Doesn't that just invite Parkinson's law, where work expands to fill the time allotted?
That's a very fair point. Parkinson's law is a real phenomenon.
Right, like if I give myself 3 hours for a 1-hour task, won't I just waste 2 hours?
You might. But context is crucial here. We have to consider the target audience of the Bowdoin framework students who are currently paralyzed by overwhelm.
Okay.
For a chronic procrastinator, underestimating time is a primary trigger for the anxiety loop. If you schedule 1 hour and 1 hour and 10 minutes goes by, you immediately feel behind.
And that feeling of failing triggers panic, which triggers avoidance.
Yeah.
So the buffer time is a psychological safety net.
Exactly. It removes the stress of the ticking clock. It provides the safety necessary to execute the microtasks without the crushing pressure of a hyper-optimized schedule.
That makes a lot of sense. In the beginning, consistency is way more important than speed. Let's walk through a specific example from the Bowdoin text to see how this works in reality.
Okay, let's look at their example for writing a paper.
So they take this massive monolith writing a paper and fracture it into 4 milestones. Research, outline, first draft, revision. The monolith is gone.
And then they define the microtasks. Under research, it's not vague. It's meet with librarian, read specific source, and take notes.
For the first draft, it's write introduction, state argument A, check formatting. You never sit down to write a paper. You only sit down to state argument A.
The scale of the threat is neutralized by the specificity.
It's brilliant. But breaking things down works great for a single project with a fixed deadline. What happens when we zoom out? How do we sustain continuous effort across our entire lives?
That requires a paradigm shift. We have to stop focusing on what we want to achieve and start focusing on who we want to become.
Which brings us back to James Clear's Atomic Habits. He draws a huge distinction between goals and systems.
Goals are about the results you want. Losing weight, writing a book. Systems are about the processes that lead to those results.
I like to think of it like a car. The goal is the destination on your GPS. You need to know where you're going. But the systems are the engine of the car.
That's a great way to put it.
You can stare at the map all day, but if the engine isn't running, you won't move an inch.
And goals suffer from a terminal flaw. They're finite. Once you achieve it, the motivation vanishes. That's why people train for a marathon, run it, and then don't run again for months.
The system collapsed because the goal was reached. So Clear says we have to look at the 3 layers of behavior change. Outcomes, which is what you get. Processes, what you do, and identity, what you believe.
True change is identity-based. The source material puts it perfectly. Every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to be.
You aren't forcing yourself to read 10 pages to hit a quota. You're casting a daily vote that you are a reader.
You're doing 5 push-ups to cast a vote that you are an athlete. It's the accumulation of those microscopic votes that shifts the identity.
And once the identity shifts, the habits become permanent, because they're just expressions of who you are. So how do we make those good habits inevitable? Clear has the 4 laws of behavior change.
Right. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying.
And to break a bad habit, you just invert them. Make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, unsatisfying. Let's look at making it obvious. Clear introduces habit stacking.
The idea is to identify a deeply ingrained habit you already perform every single day and securely attach the new behavior to it.
Leveraging time and location cues, like after I pour my morning coffee, which is the existing habit, I will immediately meditate for 1 minute.
You don't have to summon discipline out of thin air. You're hitching a ride on an established neural pathway.
Exploiting the brain's existing infrastructure. And this leads to the ultimate payoff, the compound effect. Clear shows that 1% improvement daily makes you roughly 37 times better in a single year.
The math is staggering, and Capidec explains the neurobiology behind this compounding effect. They talk about the momentum loop.
Right, small wins trigger dopamine.
Exactly. Dopamine is the primary currency of the brain's reward system. When you complete a microhabit, even making your bed, you get a localized dopamine hit.
And that physically rewires your neural circuitry, increasing the desire to repeat the behavior. It's not a mindset shift, it's a chemical rewiring.
Small wins trigger dopamine, which creates momentum, which generates organic motivation, which fuels the next action. It's a self-sustaining cycle.
KP Deck points out this is how elite performers actually operate. Olympians don't start with huge weights. Best-selling authors start with 100 words a day.
It's about breaking the all-or-nothing mindset. The belief that change must be monumental and agonizing is a trap that guarantees burnout.
If you miss a day at the gym with an all-or-nothing mindset, you feel like a failure and quit entirely.
But an identity mindset recognizes that missing a day just means you missed one vote. You just cast another vote tomorrow. Consistency over intensity.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the individual human brain. But this idea of 1% daily improvement isn't just a modern self-help hack. It's actually the foundation of one of the most successful industrial philosophies in modern history.
Yes, we have to talk about Kaizen. It proves that these micro-principles scale up flawlessly from the individual to a massive macro-level organization.
Let's look at how entire multinational organizations habit stack. Kaizen is Japanese for improvement or change for better, right?
Right. At its core, it's a philosophy of continuous, often small improvements involving everyone from the CEO down to the assembly line worker.
It's James Clear's 1% theory applied to thousands of people on a factory floor simultaneously.
And its origins are a really fascinating cross-cultural exchange. It actually traces back to American business advisors sent to Japan during the post-WWII reconstruction.
Specifically W. Edwards Deming, who brought statistical process control to Japan in 1947.
Deming advocated that quality shouldn't just be inspected at the end of the line. It must be prioritized and measured at every microscopic stage of production. He introduced the PDCA cycle.
Plan, do, check, act. It's the scientific method applied to industrial improvement.
Exactly. Plan an experiment, execute it, check the results against the baseline, and if it's beneficial, act to standardize it.
And he instilled the idea that if a deviation occurs, you stop production immediately to resolve the root cause. This became automation, or Jidoka, in the Toyota production system.
It formed the bedrock of the Toyota way. And the Kaizen framework categorizes the scope of these improvements beautifully.
Right, they have specific taxonomies. There's point Kaizen, which is quick, isolated fixes on the floor,
Right.
like a worker moving a tool closer to save reaching time.
Then there's system Kaizen, which is upper-level planning across departments. Line Kaizen for upstream and downstream communication.
And plane or cube Kaizen, spreading lean practices across the entire organization and even external suppliers.
When you contrast this with mid-20th century Western command and control methods, the psychological difference is stark.
Yeah, the Western approach was massive, top-down restructuring by executives who never set foot on the floor.
Kaizen relies on microscopic experiments and completely empowers the individual worker. It humanizes the workplace by trusting the employee's insight.
But I have a huge logistical question here. If an organization has thousands of employees doing point Kaizen, making immediate, unplanned changes to fix broken things, how does the company prevent total chaos and misalignment?
That's the central tension, and it's resolved by implementing rigorous toolkits. Kaizen isn't an invitation for random tweaking. It's structured observation based on universal checklists.
So they are all speaking the same language when identifying what needs improving. Let's open that toolkit because these manufacturing principles apply directly to our listeners' daily life.
The foundational loss philosophy is the three Mo: Muda, Mura, and Muri.
Muda is waste. Mura is deviation or imbalance.
Right.
And Muri is overloading people or machines.
Muri is exactly the cognitive overwhelm that causes procrastination. When Bowdoin suggests breaking down projects, they are teaching students how to avoid personal Muri.
That's a perfect connection. But let's zoom in on Muda, waste. The toolkit identifies 7 types of Muda.
Overproduction, waiting time, unnecessary transportation, faulty parts, excessive storage, unnecessary movement, and unfavorable manufacturing processes.
The psychological parallel is astounding. Think about James Clear saying, "Make it obvious." If your running shoes are buried under winter coats in a dark closet, you had to dig them out every morning.
In Kaizen terms, that digging is Muda due to unnecessary movement. You're wasting cognitive and physical energy.
But if you put the shoes next to your bed the night before, you eliminate that Muda. The path to action is cleared.
And to combat waste systematically, Kaizen uses the 5S movement for workplace organization.
Right. Seri, which is sort, Satan, set in order, Seiso, shine or clean, Seiketsu, standardize, and Shitsuke, sustain.
If a student applies the 5S movement to their desk before studying, clearing away old coffee cups, arranging highlighters, they are actively removing friction.
Maximizing the ability variable before they even open a book. And the toolkit also has the 7W checklist. What, who, why, how, when, where, why not, differently.
And it's all anchored by Genshi Genbutsu, which means go and see for yourself, go to the source.
Which brings us to root cause analysis. The 5 whys, asking why 5 times to drill past symptoms to the actual root cause of a failure. Let's apply this to a personal, relatable scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
Say I failed a really important midterm exam. The superficial problem is I failed. The first why is I didn't study enough.
And most people stop right there. They label themselves lazy and feel guilty.
Exactly. But in Kaizen, we ask the second why. Why didn't I study enough? Because I kept getting distracted.
Third why.
Why did I get distracted? Because I kept checking my phone.
Fourth why.
Why did I keep checking my phone? Because it was sitting right next to my textbook, vibrating.
And the fifth why.
Why was it on the desk? Because I didn't set up a proper, insulated study environment.
Boom. By the fifth why, we've drilled past the moral failing down to a highly solvable root cause.
My physical environment is poorly optimized. It links right back to our CBT Los Angeles source about removing distractions.
The 5 whys forces you to stop blaming your character and start blaming the system. I'm not lazy. My phone is just creating too much friction.
You apply a point Kaizen to your desk setup, move the phone, and the behavior corrects itself. Okay, we've talked a lot about theory, from the brain's anxiety loops to factory floors in Japan.
Let's put these systems to the ultimate test. How do you apply this to mastering a complex new skill or passing a massive exam?
We can see this perfectly mapped out in the British Council's Guide for IELTS preparation. The IELTS is a high-stakes global English exam. Huge undertaking, but their top 10 techniques mirror everything we've talked about.
Let's look at technique 1. Create a daily routine. They emphasize that studying for 30 minutes every day is vastly more effective than cramming for 4 hours on a Sunday.
That's the compound effect. Systems over goals, casting daily votes.
Technique 2 says focus on your weaknesses. Human nature wants to practice what we're already good at because it's comfortable.
But the British Council warns against that. In Kaizen terms, they're saying find the mira, the imbalance, and the muda wasted time practicing what you know, and target the deficiency.
And technique 10 mandates practicing with mock tests under timed conditions. You simulate the exam, then check your answers against the model.
Flawless execution of Deming's PDCA cycle. Plan, do, check, act.
The British Council also gives highly specific tactile learning habits, like underlining. They don't just say highlight. It's a 4-step process.
Yeah.
Skim, read carefully, highlight, review.
They also recommend mind maps for visualizing radial structures and concept maps for hierarchical tree structures, plus summarizing by paragraph and using color-coded flashcards.
Every single one of these tactile techniques is a practical application of the 5S system applied directly to cognitive load.
When you summarize a paragraph, you're sorting the critical info from the fluff. When you create a mind map, you're setting the facts in an ergonomic order. Flashcards are standardizing the review process.
You're systematically removing cognitive waste so your brain can process the material with maximum efficiency.
And this application of rigid rules isn't limited to logical tasks like test prep. It applies just as deeply to creativity. We have a source from Sylvia Pizarro-McCants on graphic design color theory.
Art is considered the ultimate expression of freedom, the ultimate blank canvas. But McCants shows that even art relies on strict systemic foundations.
Color isn't just a subjective choice, it's a calibrated communication tool. To wield it, you have to understand the rules. The system begins with the color wheel: primary, secondary, and tertiary colors.
From that wheel, the system defines color harmonies, the rules of visual appeal.
Like complementary colors opposites on the wheel, like blue and orange. They work because the high contrast creates a physical vibration in the eye. It commands attention.
Then you have analogous colors next to each other on the wheel. They process easily in the brain and create a soothing effect.
And triadic colors, evenly spaced, vibrant, but stable. Plus the emotional impacts of warm versus cool colors.
The profound connection here is that the IELTS guide, the graphic design guide, and Kaizen all emphasize that foundations and rules are what actually liberate you.
In art, as in studying, constraints breed freedom.
Exactly. Once you deeply understand the mechanics of color harmonies, you don't waste mental energy guessing what works.
You completely eliminate the cognitive muda. The artist doesn't sit paralyzed wondering what colors look good together. The geometric system of the color wheel gives the answer instantly.
This structural safety net frees up the brain's processing power to focus on true creativity and high-level performance.
It brings us full circle right back to Artist Strong. To overcome the blank canvas, they suggested limiting your palette or using a specific prompt.
You're applying the SERI principle of the 5S system to your own creative process, removing unnecessary possibilities to make starting easy.
It is incredible how universally these structural rules apply. So to wrap up this deep dive, we started out staring terrified at a blank canvas.
We learned the hesitation isn't laziness, but an anxiety loop in the amygdala.
We short-circuited that loop with the 5-minute rule. We dismantled mammoth projects into actionable milestones to reduce cognitive load.
We discovered how to build microscopic habits to shift our identity and leverage dopamine for compounding momentum.
We scaled that up to the industrial philosophy of Kaizen, using the 5 Whys and the 5S movement to relentlessly eliminate waste from our environments.
And we saw how those exact systems apply to mastering everything from English exams to graphic design.
So why does this matter to you? Because life is full of blank canvases. Whether you're studying for the IELTS, painting a masterpiece, or just trying to keep your living space clean, relying on fleeting motivation is a recipe for burnout.
But by adopting systems, you flip the paradigm. You make success inevitable and failure difficult because you've engineered your environment to make the right choice the path of least resistance.
You transition from a fragile reliance on willpower to a resilient reliance on structure. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
Well, we spent this entire deep dive constructing the perfect frictionless system for continuous improvement and efficiency. But we have to ask, what is the cost of absolute optimization?
That's a deep question.
If we habit stack every minute of our day and Kaizen every single inefficiency out of our lives, do we accidentally engineer out the messy, spontaneous, and beautifully inefficient moments where true serendipity and human connection actually happen?
Wow.
Is there a point where we shouldn't improve, where the blank canvas should just be allowed to stay blank for a little while? Something to think about. Until next time, keep diving deep.